so much for coming to our first talk of the Amend series, and this is featuring one of our artists, Anna. So Anna's going to talk about her work today, and then at the end of the talk, there's going to be a Q&A portion where you can go ahead and ask questions. I do ask that until we get to the Q&A, if you can keep your mics muted, just so any background noise doesn't make it into the talk. And we are recording. If you do think of something and you want to get it out there while you're thinking of it, I put a little note in the chat. You can type it into the chat and we can always refer back there at the Q&A portion as well. And then something that's also really cool. So there's going to be a raffle, and Becky has sent this for me to read off to you guys. So courtesy of the Arts Pathway, there will be a raffle for 1 card account credits. With your 1 card, you can purchase items at the bookstores, CCBC cafes, printing, and most campus vending machines. The drawings will be held after the conclusion of the artist talks, so at the end of the series. Okay, not at the end of today, but the end of all of them, so the end of next week. And winners will be notified by email. So just a reminder, also, that registration is now open for the winter and spring semester. So please make sure to meet your advisor and register and make sure you know your pathway. So that's a note from our lovely Becky Ocampo. And on that, I am going to give it away to Anna to go ahead and lead us in our talk.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about my work. I had a show at CCBC in Essex a few years ago, and it was really nice to kind of come onto campus and see where maybe some of you guys are. But let me go ahead. But since then, I've moved to Colorado, so that's where I'm zooming in from now, is Boulder, Colorado. So I'm kind of missing the nice climate of DC during this time of year. So I'm not sure how much you guys know about me or if you know anything about me at all, but I'm Native American, I'm Navajo Creek, and I'm also Greek. I was born in Lawrence, Kansas, and moved around a lot and went out east for school and lived in DC for 12 years. And we just moved out to Colorado last year. And I work primarily, I'm a trained sculptor, but I now work primarily in installation, video, and performance art. And my work tends to be all about Native identity. There are some times where I have kind of looked into my Greek identity, but for the most part, a lot of the issues that I talk about within my work and kind of consider all have to do with Native identity. So let me... So this is kind of a chronological slideshow of my work, spanning from my time at Dartmouth College, which is where I went to my undergrad. I was a double major in Native American Studies and Studio Art, and it really was the bridge of both of those majors that I think drew my interest to working in visual arts and kind of reflecting on Native histories a lot at that time. This is a piece called Navajo Baby Blanket, and you can kind of see it's made up of kind of baby blanket fabrics and beer cans and safety pins. And so I went out and collected all these beer cans from Frat Row and cleaned them out and kind of flattened them so I could utilize them in this project. But this, was a direct reflection of kind of, the aspects of alcoholism in Native communities, even within my own family. And so that's kind of, this was in my senior thesis show, and it's about 2.5 feet by 3 feet. And also during this time when I was in college, I was looking at a lot of old photographs, specifically by Edward Curtis from the 19th century. And I was noticing the different kind of tools, not just looking at the people, but seeing their way of life and how they were living. And something that I was really attracted to in some of these photos were called travois. And there are these triangular structures that are pulled usually by horses or dogs. And that's kind of like the transportation to kind of move one's belongings in the high plains back in the day. And so I decided to make one for myself. And so I put backpack straps on it. You can kind of see them right there. And I loaded it down with stuff from my dorm room. And when I initially made this, it was just, it was in the senior thesis show, and it was leaning up against the wall. And somebody asked, are you going to use it? And I had never done performance art before, and I'd never even really thought about it. But I realized that I'd made this tool of performance. And so I decided to give it a try. I've never really kind of considered myself a performer in the traditional sense of a performance artist. So I was really nervous about it, and I was nervous being a brown woman walking in traffic, dragging this thing in New Hampshire. And so one way that I kind of made myself feel more comfortable is I added my license plate from my real car onto this, and you can kind of see it at the bottom of the travois. Because I thought, well, at least this is kind of legal. And so I used bike signals to kind of move around the traffic and everything. And it was really exciting, and it was a lot of fun to kind of thinking about kind of the performative aspect of activating a sculpture instead of just leaving it and looking at it. And so this was definitely my first kind of step into that realm. This is, when I went to graduate school, this is another kind of thing that I built and activated through performance. It's a rocket ship, and it's about 12 and a half feet tall. And if you look in the top part, there's a chain in the middle up there. And so it's a working rocket ship. It holds about 5 people. And you can go inside, and it has kind of a southwest interior. And so in terms of the presentation of this piece, when I showed it to people, I would read this text and then go through the activation of the sculpture. So this is what I read. When the natural resources of Earth start becoming scarce, many people will look towards the option of leaving this planet in hope of finding another planet that will sustain life. While most people will be in the fancy, sophisticated NASA-type space shuttles, there will be people, such as Indians, who cannot afford such luxury and will have to build their own ships. These less complicated rocket ships will not be able to take off on their own and will have chains that hook onto the larger rocket ships. But one thing each of those shoddy rocket ships will have is an escape hatch in the floor. As all of the larger spaceships begin their countdown to take off, all the Indians will be slipping out of their escape hatches. The Indians will be putting their feet on the ground while everyone else is on their way out of here. So it had a working trapdoor, and when I presented this piece, I kind of utilized that and kind of came out the bottom and everything. Let's see. After I finished my time at Yale, I went to an art residency in Maine. It's called Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. And while I was there, I did kind of my most well-known piece. It's called Let's Dance. It's a video that's about 15 minutes long, and it's 30 different snippets, 30 different clips of me dancing with different people for about 30 seconds. And in this piece, I was trying to reverse the role of the usual Native kind of character in any scenario. Anytime in my life, usually Natives are kind of seen as educators. Technically, I am an educator, but in terms of just kind of being out in the world, people always want to learn about Native spirituality, Native religion. You know, when I was younger, people are always like, well, what did Natives think about this and that? And, you know, do you live in a teepee? Like, you know, kind of goofy questions sometimes. And so I decided to kind of flip that scenario on its head and become the person that receives the education. And so I asked 30 different people to show me a dance and teach it to me. And I'm not like a great dancer by any means. But I like the idea of it being casual, of me being kind of a contemporary Native woman in this space, not the idyllic, like Native, you know, romanticized image of what people think a Native woman should look like, but what an actual Native woman looks like. And so that's me doing the bump with someone. all the Jewish girls that were at the residency taught me the hora and put me up on a chair, which was really scary. And I'll show you guys a little bit of it. We'll just kind of skip through a couple of. East, West, every state, come on, better than hate. Millions, the only thing we in the heavy to make. So let's see. So that was called Let's Dance. In around 2007, I was living, or 2007, 2008, I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I created this suite of photographs, about 8 different photograph stills that were from performances where I wrapped myself in duct tape and kind of created these stories of futuristic Native myths. Like if things existed in the future and myths were created from them, what would those moments look like? And so I think I have 3 examples. It's called the Legend series. So this was Legend 1. This is Legend 7, I think. And this is Legend 5. And so the product of these performances were the large inkjet prints. Sorry. That was my little boy, my son, sorry. Let's see. So these are some small drawings that I did, and I used graphite and gouache. I'm not usually an artist that works 2-dimensionally, but I created this series based on Native American face paint. So I was really interested in the minimalist design that natives use when when kind of creating their face paint for ceremonies and dances, and the graphic quality and how similar it was to paintings from like the 50s and 60s that were really kind of well known within contemporary art. And so when I started this project, I was imagining going places and sketching like the face paint designs that I was seeing on different dancers. And then I realized like that there's a real familial ownership to that. And I didn't want to appropriate those designs from them. And so I realized that, and I also I don't like to make work that's super serious necessarily all the time. And so I ended up watching an old movie that's probably too old for you guys, but it's called Dances with Wolves. And it's from like the early 90s. So this face paint are from the characters within that movie. So this first one on the far left is like Pawnee number 6. And then the next one is like Pawnee number 2. And then the far right one is called Wind in His Hair. But if you can imagine that their eyes would be like kind of like a third of the way down the square, and their mouth would be about 2/3 of the way down the square in the center. And so really kind of pulling from that. And so I did another series as well. This is called Last of the Mohicans, from that movie. That's probably too old for you guys. But so these are kind of one of the first forays into working minimally. This is a sculpture that I installed in Manhattan. It's in a place called Socrates Sculpture Park. So I don't know if you guys have heard of that story about Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, being bought by the Dutch from the Lenape Indians for $24 worth of trinkets. And so I was living in New York during this time when I made it. And so I gave $24 to 24 different natives that I knew living in the area and asked them to buy me something, to give me something that was worth $24. And so people gave me fabric, beads, pictures, clothing, all different kinds of stuff. And they would, and I built this scaffolding that kind of mimicked the skyline of Manhattan, as you can kind of see behind it. And the idea of using scaffolding is that a lot of tribes use it as a way of kind of giving offerings to different beings, but also some tribes use it as a place of putting their dead in lieu of burial. And so I like this idea of kind of revering these objects in some way. And so you can kind of see, so there's a neat story about that antler that you can kind of see the silhouette of. A friend of mine who's from the Yakima Reservation in Washington State, I gave her $24, and she sent that $24 to her mom, and her mom back home bought some salmon, $24 worth of salmon, and then took that salmon and traded it for that deer skull with the antlers, and then sent that back to my friend. And so that's how we ended up getting that in the exhibition. So I thought that was really neat, kind of utilizing that traditional bartering system. And this is somebody donated their entire amount. And it was up for 6 months. And this was one of the first outdoor sculptures I created. And it was interesting because it was open to the public, people started ripping off the objects, which I thought was exactly in line with what this was all about. And so these are just kind of documentations of how people would just go and rip, because the objects were set in resin on top of the scaffolding. And so, I mean, you couldn't necessarily easily pull anything off of the scaffolding. So it was like they were taking rocks and slamming it against things and everything. So I said that I usually focus a lot on my Native identity. In this was an installation I did at the American Indian Gallery in New York City. And I decided, since it was a given that any artist that shows in this gallery, considering it's called the American Indian Gallery, that I didn't need to really talk about my Native identity in this space. So I decided to talk about my Greek identity and really explore that, because in my work, I'm interested in stretching the expectations that people kind of come to a space with. And if they know this is a Native artist, what are they expecting and what are the assumptions that they're coming with? And so for me, it's this idea that I'm not just Native, but I'm also Greek. I speak Greek. I visit my family there during non-COVID times, and I'm very connected with them. And so to be able to see that I can be two different things simultaneously is important to my identity as a whole. And so this installation is called Clash of the Titans, and it was really about a passage of text from a book called Zorba the Greek that I read during one of the summers that I was visiting my family there. And so it deals with familial kind of myths and violence and different narratives that kind of go through families, like through generations. And it's made up of drawings, text, video, and about 3,000, maybe 5,000 casts of total. So there's fingers and wrists and noses and shoulder blades. See, these are all fingers right there, kind of bundled together. This is a series of work that's called Aesthetically Speaking. And so all these women, none of them are models, they're professionals in Washington, D.C. Some are lobbyists, some work for, in the House of Representatives, some people are attorneys. And so one thing that we always talked about when we were in D.C. is that sometimes when people see a Native woman, they don't necessarily actually hear us when we're speaking, because they're so just like enamored in the idea of meeting a Native American, or just assuming that what we have to say isn't quite as important as what other people might be saying. And so that's kind of what this whole series dealt with. Let's see. This piece is called Edges of the Ephemeral. And it was initially installed in Santa Fe at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts in 2012, but there's been several different iterations of it. And I think it was shown there in Baltimore at in Essex, and it's also been shown in Brooklyn and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's going to be in Colorado Springs at a museum in February. And in this particular piece, all the wood is found wood from the Navajo Reservation, from my family land, from old corrals and barns and kind of old hogans, like houses, native houses and stuff. And the signs all have to do with Navajo ideas about multiple worlds and kind of our myths and our legends that kind of go along with that, our creation story. So you can kind of see there's snippets of different things. And during this time, the way that I got the text was I started using SurveyMonkey, and I sent out surveys just of like 5 or 6 questions to all the Navajos I knew, and asked them to respond, asking like, are we in the 4th world? Are we in the 5th world? Is there a world after this? Like, what's going to happen in this world? That type of thing. And I took their parts of their responses and put these on the signs. And it was a really exciting way to kind of interact with a Native community, because living in DC, there's not a whole lot of us. And so it was just nice to kind of make connections like that across the US. And I've done this many times since then, kind of trying to utilize connections with Native communities through social media. So I'll kind of show examples of that. This is a piece that followed. It's called Native Primer. And it is made up of responses from Native people that have lived in DC or currently lived in DC, and their experiences in living in the area. And so the whole gallery is filled with text and with these wood bundles that you see. And they kind of start off kind of negative and become more neutral. And then as you kind of work your way around the gallery, they become more kind of at peace and more positive in some ways. So there you go. And this one, I did another iteration of this one at my old college, and had responses about people that had gone to college there or were currently going to school there. This is a gallery installation at the University of Chicago, and it's made up of 3 different sculptures. So it's called She Made for Her, and it's this idea of kind of narratives that we kind of create to reinforce our identity is where it came from. So I was actually at the National Museum of the American Indian in DC when we were living there. And I was with my family. I have 3 little kids, and so we were walking around just kind of hanging out one afternoon. And I saw this woman walking, and I know a lot of people that work at the museum, and I knew that she didn't work at the museum. And so I started following her, and I realized that she had this group of people, and she was telling them telling them what things were and everything. And so I was listening in, and I realized that she had no idea what these things were, that she was pointing at objects and saying, well, this is a breastplate, but it was actually like a backrest, like a chair. And like saying that this was she was just completely making up her own definitions of what these things were. And I just thought that was wild. And like, I could tell that she was visibly Native, but so I was just very intrigued with her. I still have no idea who she was or what she was doing. So I decided that I would make this whole exhibition for her, which is why it's called She Made for Her. And I decided to make these objects in the way that the objects were made in the museum. And so, anytime things were made back in the day, it was sourced from whatever you would find like in your local area. So I was thinking, okay, in this day and age, what would we find in our, in the Beltway area? And I decided a lot of IKEA would be what we would find. And so these are all remnants. I don't know if you guys know the as is section at IKEA. This is where, so I started buying a lot of the as is, like old remnants and scraps and stuff, and creating these objects. And that kind of got expensive, so I started dumpster diving in the back of IKEA to kind of pull out items and everything. And so I wanted to make these kind of ambiguous kind of objects that seemed full of narrative and meaning. And so I created these things, and then I sent images of them out to 20 Native women that I knew. And I asked them to send me an audio recording of what these things were, the story of them, what they were utilized for, to give me the history of these artifacts that I created. And so as you walk through the gallery, you can't see them here, but there are hidden speakers throughout the gallery. So when you stand in a certain place, you can hear somebody telling you what these things are and why they were made and things like that. And so I was really excited about it. And so I don't know, like this woman has no idea that this entire exhibition was created for her. But like I said, I like to keep things kind of like tongue in cheek. And so if you take the abbreviation of She Made for Her, so that's SMFH. So anyways, these are these are the same objects, but these were taken in my studio. And you can kind of just get a better look at them, how they were made. And this, my kids thought I made them a throne. That's kind of how they saw this, even though I think a lot of people kind of see a vessel. So you can kind of see close up the texture of like that IKEA wood. The only thing that wasn't sourced from IKEA were the screws. Even all of the rope that was used to like put this entire structure together, I pulled apart doormats made of like that were woven together kind of threads, and used that to kind of hold this whole structure together. That's a close up. This is, so now we're getting into kind of more recent work. This is a piece that I finished last year. It's called Trace. And this is a 4-minute video, and this is a video still from it. And about 2-3 years ago by now, a study came out of Seattle, the Urban Indian Health Institute, and it was talking about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls statistics, and how there are like over 3,000 cases, open cases of missing women and murdered girls, and so that are Indigenous, and that there were around 500 that are confirmed cases, but that nobody was really paying attention to this. And in addition to that, but just kind of what was happening at the time, there was a big movement, and it's still going on within specifically Native communities, but I think it's starting to get more kind of attention from the media and from different people. And so I wanted to explore this idea of portraiture, because I've always liked how, women, in particularly women of color, but I tend to pay attention to the Native women aspect of the use of selfies, and how that's changed this whole idea of traditional portraiture, and how we've, before, like in, long ago times, people would sit for portraits, and it would be all about like if you had money, if you were a certain kind of echelon within society. But now with the advent of, video, cameras being so accessible to everyone, that we're really changing that idea of defining our own visual identity. And so, and it was interesting how a lot of the missing posters that you find are pulled from Facebook or Instagram. And so you have this idealization of what this Native woman wanted to look like, and that becomes the face of her death in essence. And so I asked Native women to send me selfies that I could use in this project to kind of promote. So I have over 300, and my hope is to get to around 500. And so for the first 100 I received, I put them together in this video, and then the video is just kind of streaming, and I'm trying to draw them all at once, like on these big pieces of paper, as fast as I can, but the videos are always changing. And so what you end up getting are like these big marks. And so I think I have a little bit I can show you. Oops, maybe. Sorry about that. So the project, like in this specific part of the project, it's the video, but also the drawings that came out of this. So you can kind of see, like, I'm just trying to draw, but they keep changing. So I never fully get to draw any one of them. And towards the end of the video, it kind of goes a little bit faster and faster. And so, let's see, this is a close-up of one of them. And then these are all 8 of the ones I did at the time. And so I don't know if you guys have ever done an exercise in any of your art classes. There's something called the exquisite corpse. And usually in the exquisite corpse exercise, you have like all these pieces of paper set up, and every student is at a seat. And throughout the class, you all work on the same drawing. So you might start a drawing and then you switch seats, kind of like you kind of moving around. So by the end of it, everyone has drawn on every drawing in some way. And so I kind of did this reverse of that. So the subject matter was changing, but they're all done on the same piece of paper. And so I like that kind of idea, like that kind of layering of this being an exquisite corpse exercise to create these drawings. And so in a completely different realm of kind of working, last fall, I became really interested or reinterested in the work of Sol LeWitt, because there was this whole movement of decolonization within universities and museums was something I wanted to, don't mind the toilet flushing, it's my son. So variations of incomplete open cubes was a long kind of series that Sol LeWitt did back in the 60s and 70s, and it turned into sculptures that were kind of like the iconic sculptures of minimalism and contemporary art. And a lot of people kind of refer to them as the most basic form within sculpture. And so here's an example so these are his drawings here that turned into these. And so I decided I wanted to kind of think about decolonization and what that would look like within my art making and how I would utilize that. And so I started thinking about binding and using kind of these back to IKEA, but these IKEA table legs and different things in lieu, kind of in standing of Sol LeWitt's incomplete cubes, like using that structure as the thing that needed to be decolonized. And so these are a couple of videos. This is an unedited one, but you can kind of, so I'm trying to like wrap it and bind it to myself in order to decolonize it. And then these are, I made about 8 sculptures as well, kind of out using the same kind of idea and this idea of binding to make that happen. And these are a couple of the sculptures. Let's see. This is the beginning, a project I did last November, so a year ago this month, for Native American Heritage Month. It was a social media kind of push that I did, and it's called the Native Guide Project. It actually comes out of an elementary teaching kind of method called responsive classroom. This idea of if I if I encourage you to do things, and I, applaud you for the way you're doing things, maybe you'll continue doing it more and you'll become even better at it. So so this is a billboard that was in downtown Colorado Springs. So this idea that if I encourage people to be more, to be better about kind of dealing with Native Americans or thinking about them, that it would kind of bolster those interactions and kind of make them better. So these were billboards, but they also were put out. So I have a page, they're still up, a page on Instagram and one on Facebook. And during the whole month of November last year, I pushed them out as ads. So you might be scrolling down and then all of a sudden something like this would pop up, and it wouldn't have anything to click. It wouldn't have like anything to sell you, but it would just be there. And it was really neat because through those social media ads, you're able to see how many people tried to click, how many people like paused on it, and so all of those kind of impressions and interactions. And so I know through social media, I was able to kind of reach around 30,000 people through this project. And this is my most recent work, and it's kind of a mix of kind of what I was thinking lately, just in terms of politics, but also still utilizing that very graphic wording that I was interested in. So this was just up and came down like last Sunday, I think, up in a gallery in Denver. And it's a drawing, and like I said, I don't work 2D very much, but it's a mix of 2D and some beads you can kind of see, and glitter. And that's all.
Okay, thank you, Anna. That was so interesting. And yes, we did have your work in the immigration show. It was 4 or 5 years ago. Edges of the Ephemeral and Native Primer. Those were spectacular pieces. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is go ahead and open it up for questions. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Okay, none in the chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and request, if you want to go ahead and ask a question, go ahead and address it straight to Anna, and just go ahead and unmute and we'll go from there. Okay? Does anyone have a question?
I have a question. Throughout your presentation, I noticed you said you started with the performance art. Is there one that you prefer more now that you've kind of gotten into a little bit of both now?
Not really. I think it really comes down to the idea, like what is it that I want to talk about, and what's the idea at hand, and then what fits it best. Like if I think that it would be best to do performance, then I'll do that. And if it would be, sculptural, and like I said, I hadn't done a lot of drawing, but I'm starting to get, that's kind of what I'm focusing on more right now. But that could change. So yeah, I just try to be open and not think, okay, I'm a performance artist and that's all I'm going to do. I try to keep it as open as I can.
I have a question about the Manhattan Project, where you've put this artwork in the world in a very public space, and then it got damaged, and how you sort of release that work and like are able to accept that it's going to have like things happen to it that you have no control over.
I think that was the first time I'd ever done anything outdoor, and I had no clue what I was doing, and I did the best I could, like in terms of securing objects. But I didn't, we had this resin over it that it was encased in, and I thought that would be enough. When people were talking to me about it initially, like the people that run the sculpture park, they're like, you're gonna want to bolt it down. You're gonna want to do, because they kind of foresaw stuff like this happening. But I didn't want it to be about that, because there was something about just the whole idea of having these objects that were supposed to be gifts, and then to like have to like screw them down and like to bolt everything together. And it just, so I decided, like, if people were going to do that, then they would. I really didn't think they would, but they did. And so I don't think there was ever a point where I was sad about it. But and then it just becomes more about like the public's interaction with like contemporary art or like art in general, because this sculpture park is open and it's open to the public. And when I was installing, there was like a mom and a little kid walking in, and the kid started jumping on my sculpture and trying to climb on it. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, I don't think you're supposed to be doing that. And the woman yelled at me and said, that's exactly what this park is for. You're supposed to get on the artwork.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no. So, I mean, I knew what I was in for. I just didn't know the depth of it. And so I learned from it.
Thank you.
Anna, I have a question. It seems like a lot of your process involves working collaboratively with others, and I'm just wondering if you could speak about how that experience is, and also not having control over how people, will respond. I guess you were just talking about with the work getting destroyed, but also in more positive ways, how people will respond to kind of your ideas and how that process and influences your work.
I think so. I kind of have known ever since I began making work, and I think it was more when I was, no, even in college I kind of knew. But when I went to graduate school and I got my own studio, and I was, that's what we were supposed to do all day long, was make our work. I realized I wasn't a solitary artist. Like, I'm not good at that, of like working alone in my studio all day. And I think that's what really drew me to teaching, was that I'm able to teach and work in my studios and be around people and interact. And I like that aspect of it. And so, when I first started making work in college, like, and I made that travois, I was like, hey, you guys, like, come, some people are studying and they were on, taking a dinner break, and I dragged them into the woods to help me find wood, and so that's always been part of my artistic practice, is pulling people in with me. And I think that, it's not just for help, but also to kind of help think through ideas. And I feel like for me, like it's always been usually Native people that have helped me. And then it kind of solidifies, like, wow, they're part of this. And then we're kind of creating kind of a new way of working for Native people in this moment. And I like that idea of it. But I like the idea that, a lot of times when people see contemporary art, they think of me as being kind of like me and them. And like, I'm not a part of that, that's over there. But when people are actually part of that process and they see what's happening, it gets them really invigorated, and I think more open to kind of seeing contemporary work. And that's never been necessarily my goal, but I think that's what comes out of it naturally. And so, when I work, and that's what I think with the social media aspect of it, it's been able to reach so many other people that aren't usually a part of things like this necessarily. And so I like that idea of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. And can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that presentation. I love your work, and it was fun seeing the dancing and the travois. I liked hearing about your influences, including Silhouette. I'm curious how whether Jenny Holzer has been an influence to you in any way.
Yes, I think the use of text has been, we could talk about Barbara Kruger, like Rupersberg. He was actually one of my mentors at Yale when I was there. And so the idea of just using text has always been really interesting to me. Like I like that it doesn't necessarily become loaded. I don't know if you look throughout my work, I don't use a lot of color. And I realized early on, like, I'm not a person that can like match wallpaper and pillows or something like that. Like, I'm not good at bringing random colors and prints together, and that's not the type of artist I am. And I realized that adding color and those kind of aspects when you're talking about race can really add more to the conversation than you might necessarily want. And I think that use of bare text I've always been drawn to, because you're usually, like within the US, you're usually speaking to people in a language they understand and cutting right to it rather than layering it in a lot of different ways. And so depending on what you're talking about and the exact language you use can really push that conversation in different directions in the reading of that work. So, because I mean, like, there's like, you know, there's a Native artist, Edgar Heaperbird's, that uses a lot of text, but it also has a lot to do with the painterly effect he does with it, and the color and those types, because his are usually prints. And so, I'm not interested in beautifying things, although I did use glitter this time.
Mm-hmm.
But I am, but I like the directness of it. And so, yes, I would say I am influenced by those artists immensely.
Thanks so much.
Does anyone else have any questions? Jess, did you have anything that you wanted to ask in regards to what your class might need to know for discussion?
No, we're gonna meet back in, if you're in my 2D design class who is here, we're gonna just meet back into teams and talk about the talk and your projects after that too. Thank you so much, Anna. That was really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for everything, and good luck with your.
I want to say thank you. We are in my classroom. We are painting self-portraits, and we had you streaming. And in the beginning, I couldn't get you on the big screen. So my laptop is here and the big screen.
Oh, wow.
And so it was really cool to see, especially the self-portrait aspect and the identity aspect. So we really appreciate it. And I just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you.
For the whole class. It was wonderful. Thanks.
I didn't realize we have an applause option on the screen there. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Anna, so much for your talk. It was very informative. I especially loved, as Sharon mentioned, the drawing one. That was very interesting, especially watching the video as they went faster and faster. That really gets that point across. So just wow. Thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And thank you again.